Dang! What's up with all these books?
What's shaking? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. I make videos every single week on fantasy and horror books, doing deep dives, discussions, reviews, more general fun stuff. So if that's your kind of thing, if you're a reader like me, then I would love it if you stuck around. So obviously today's video is me going through all of the books that I read in the last 12 months, the last year, and kind of ranking them. Not necessarily from best to worst, more so just if I liked them, if I really liked them, if I didn't like them, if I hated them, if they were meh. Today I'm going to be figuring out which of those categories every book I've read this year will fit into. Before I do though, I want to have a really quick chat about this last year of me being on booktube, as well as my plans for my videos in this channel going forward. But if you would like to just skip straight to the book rankings, then just go to right here. There you go. Go on, I see you looking. So I started this channel, Wolfe the Story Nomad, on April 1st of 2021. So less than a year ago. But I did already have a channel where I was making like writing and book related videos. I still have that channel where now I do exclusively writing videos, where I do videos about my writing process and how it's going and what I'm working on. A lot of people were subscribed to that channel for the writing, and a lot of people were subscribed to that channel for the reading, but not a lot of people were subscribed for both. So I split them. And that's how we ended up with Wolfe the Story Nomad, where I make videos about all of my favorite fantasy and horror books and my least favorite. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I made this channel less than a year ago. It's already got over 1,000 subscribers. So I just want to say thank you. I want to give a big thank you to all of you who have watched and subscribed in the last year. Everyone who has been commenting on my videos, saying nice things about my content, it really does mean the world to me, so thank you. So moving on, in 2021 I got back into reading fantasy in a pretty big way. I'd taken a significant break from reading fantasy. The last couple of years I was reading pretty much exclusively horror because I was actually working on, I was working on my own horror book, so I was just reading a lot of horror around the time to kind of keep myself in that mind frame. In 2021 I read a lot more fantasy, and I plan to read a lot more of it going forward into 2022 as well. In the short term, my plan is to finish reading the series that I've begun, series like Stormlight Archive. I've got about 2 books left in that one, or 1.5. Maybe finish The Wheel of Time this year. Let's see how we go with that one. After I'm done catching up with those fantasy series that I haven't quite finished yet, I can actually start reading the new releases at the same time as everyone else. And in 2022 I actually plan on reading a lot more horror this year as well. Now that I've finally had my break, I want to start reading horror again, so I'm really excited for that. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading, and with a lot of reading will come a lot of videos, in-depth reviews, more of these like video essay style videos that so many of you guys love. A lot more collabs. I actually have a collab coming up very soon on this channel. Serious stuff, fun stuff, everything fantasy and horror themed. I'm very excited and I hope you enjoy. With all that said, you will notice that a lot of the books that I'm talking about today, a lot of them did come out quite a while ago, but I read them this year. Last year. Damn. So I kicked off 2021 by rereading one of my favorite fantasy series that I read from my childhood. That is Deltora Quest. I wanted to see if this series, or the first volume in the large series, The Belt of Deltora, would hold up as an adult. And I can tell you that the resounding answer to that question is hell yeah! Reading Deltora Quest again felt like that one scene from Ratatouille where the food critic has an intense flashback to his childhood. And for me, that is a time of Nickelodeon cartoons, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Beyblades, and a lot of other aggressively marketed children's toys. Nostalgia aside, if I could summarize what I like about this series, even as an adult, it's that despite being relatively short books, around 20 to 30,000 words each, Emily Rodda was still able to tell an enormous story about a trio of heroes that become a family during the course of a long adventure. An adventure that spans over a huge distance with lots of unique monsters and characters. Some of the books were obviously much better than others in this series, but rating the series as a whole, I would have to put it in nice, which is it's the second highest here. 6 Scary Stories is an anthology of stories handpicked by Stephen King, the king of horror himself. Stories that were submitted to him as part of a competition, but stories that he enjoyed so much he gave them the chance to shine in their own little collection, aside from his work. That is a very intriguing concept for a collection of short stories. What I will say is this though, unfortunately it is very small, and to be honest, pretty forgettable. That's what she said. I was done with it in probably about 40 minutes. It was a really quick read, and I had to look back on my notes to even talk about it now because I literally struggled to remember what like 4 of the 6 stories were even about. The only story from this collection that I think is really worth mentioning is probably The Unpicking, which is a fun but creepy take on Toy Story? And look, most of the other stories weren't horrible, but it did feel like a lot of these authors had a good idea before they went to bed, and they decided to just kind of lay in bed and quickly write the short story on their notes app on their phone before calling it a day and turning out the light. If I had to put any book in this video in the Fat L ranking, which is the worst ranking, it would probably have to be 6 Scary Stories, because it kind of felt like an L for everyone involved. It was an L for me as the reader because it was a snooze fest. It was an L for all of the writers involved because even the good stories were kind of filtered out by the unremarkable ones. And I'll be honest, it was kind of an L for Stephen King because I don't know how much I trust his judgment anymore when it comes to other people's horror. Breach of Peace by Daniel B. Greene. What does the B stand for? It could be Buzz. Breach of Peace was pretty impressive as far as debuts go, although it did have its issues. The problem I think that most people agree on is that it was written much more like the prologue to a larger story than its own self-contained, or even slightly self-contained, novella. Put simply, it just didn't really have any business being a separate book. It does a pretty good job at setting up the tone for the fantasy world, the tone being a grim and violent political mystery. Unfortunately though, we end up with a lot more unanswered questions than we do with actual information for how this world works, or what is actually going on. Breach of Peace will have to go into the meh rank. It wasn't bad, especially as a debut. I actually think it was pretty good, but it didn't leave me holding my breath for the next one. Warbreaker was actually my first Brandon Sanderson book. Yeah, I know. How darest I, a fantasy simpleton, claim to be a true reader? Kiss my glorious Australian ass crack. At the time of reading Warbreaker, I was actually blown away. It is a great book, especially as a standalone as far as fantasy standalones go. I always think they're kind of hit or miss, but Warbreaker, it works just fine. However, after reading 2 of the 4 books in Brando's Stormlight Archive series, I've realized that Warbreaker is actually technically one of his weaker works, which is ironically kind of a compliment in itself. It's still great, but compared to the others, The magic system in Warbreaker is one of the most unique that I've ever read, while still not being too complicated, which is a risk that a lot of magic systems seem to run in fantasy. And the greater plot had more than enough tension and excitement to keep me reading. You know what? I think Warbreaker will go into the nice rank. The Broken Sword by Poul Anderson. There's not a whole lot for me to actually tell you about this one unless you want to go and watch the video I did on it. It's a pretty fun but ultimately dated Viking style fantasy that came up just a bit short on reaching its true potential as an epic fantasy. I think it's pretty good in its own right, although at the time of publishing it was probably overshadowed quite a bit by a little fantasy series you've probably heard of called the Lord of Ring or something. I don't know. Who cares? The Broken Sword will get a meh. The Hollows by Mark Edwards was okay. A story about a down on his luck father trying to reconnect with his young daughter by taking her to a camp resort and then finding out it's the site of a grisly murder mystery. There were some deeply dramatic and emotional moments, but ultimately it didn't really stick with me for too long. Meh. 2021 was the year that I finally started reading The Wheel of Time. It was the year that all of the peer pressure finally broke me down. Thank you so much. And The Wheel of Time starts with The Eye of the World. And how about that TV adaptation, guys. The discourse around that has not been contentious at all. F***ing yikes. It's tricky to rank this one because it's technically a good book, I think, and I really did enjoy it, but the whole last section of The Eye of the World was such a mess that it's kind of thrown me off. It definitely achieved its goal of making me want to read more and making me want to continue on with the series, and you know what, making me feel like I was connected to the characters, like loyal.
Look at this dude. Wait till you see the... Look at the top of his head!
I appreciate that the series gets better as it goes on. I've heard that from so many people and I'm excited for that, but taking a big step back and trying to be objective, I think The Eye of the World is kind of an unremarkable start to a fantasy series. I'm still gonna give it a noise, because why not, but that's about as high as I think I can go. The Way of Kings, first book in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Brando Sando. Such an insanely well written and fascinating story. I think above all, Brando has a talent, and I don't just mean a skill that he's achieved through a lot of practice, I mean a natural, God-given talent for creating characters that feel authentic and endearing, like Kaladin. I loved Way of Kings a lot. It's easily one of my favorite fantasy reads ever, so as far as ranking it goes, I think it definitely deserves absolutely bussin'. My opinion on Dune might be the most controversial of the bunch here, because on one hand, I love the plot and the conflict of the story. I think it's probably one of the greatest plots to a sci-fi ever written, but on the other, I actually really didn't like the writing style. So much of the book, especially the beginning of it, is needlessly dense and very hard to keep track of, and I know a lot of people, a lot of you even, might want to defend Frank Herbert's style of writing there. I don't think it needed to be made that complicated within the first chapter or two. I understand that writing like this was a lot more common in the 60s, but it just hasn't aged very well in my opinion. I'm sorry in advance, but I'm going to give Dune a minor L. You know, it's not a fat L, it's not a devastating L, but it's a minor L. It's just a little bit of, it's just a little one. Rebels Creed, the follow-up to Breach of Peace by Daniel Buzz Greene. Huge improvement on the first book. I'll say that straight away. Lots of action, lots of intrigue. The gritty noir approach to telling a political fantasy was pretty refreshing. I haven't seen that done a whole lot, and in this case I think it was done pretty well. There were flaws, but despite those few flaws, I think the story finished pretty strong. It most definitely stepped up towards the end, it definitely increased the stakes and upped the ante, and it left me very excited for what comes next. Rebels Creed gets a noise. Words of Radiance, this is the second book in the Stormlight Archive, and I have to be honest, this one was somehow even better than the first one. The already complex fantasy world and magic is expanded on so much more in this second book, and we get to spend a lot more time getting emotionally attached to the main three characters who are finally meeting with each other and having their stories intertwine. You know what, call me a Brando simp, I don't care. I love the way that he approaches everything. The action, the world building, the magic, the characters, 10 out of 10s all across the board. I'm starting on Oathbringer now actually, and I'm stoked, son. Words of Radiance is bussin', my guy. There are a series of comic stories based on the video game continuity of The Witcher, and they are so much fun to read. I reviewed House of Glass this year, a story where Geralt gets stranded in a mysterious and dangerous mansion in the middle of a haunted woods. He gets stranded there with an elderly hunter. There are so many different types of monsters from the Witcher world in this one short comic alone, and I think it perfectly captures the Monster of the Week style storytelling or structure that so many people love most about The Witcher, people like me. House of Glass was nice. Lots of fun, but still a relatively normal day in Geralt's life. Looking at all of these rankings, the first thing you'll notice is that I am a pretty easy man to please. I don't hide that, it's no secret, and I'm definitely not complaining. I like liking things. Maybe except for Frank Herbert's exposition. Let me know what you think of these books. How did your year in reading go? Are you excited for the next year? And if you would like to see my full thoughts on literally any of the books that I've mentioned today, all you need to do is go to my channel. It's that easy, dummy. Thank you for watching, especially for watching through the whole video. You are my favorite. Catch ya.